Hey guys, welcome to the next class. Let's make a drip cake that's full of sprinkles on the inside so that when you cut it open, they come tumbling out. Here's a couple things that I sent. The squeeze bottle, I guess it's called. That's what we're going to use for the drip. And then these really fancy sprinkles from Sprinkle Pop. They have metallics in there as well. A couple other things we're going to need are your basics, the turntable, grip pad, cake board. I actually ended up cutting my grip pad a little smaller. I didn't love how it was hanging over the edge like this and my hand would grab it when I was turning, so that's something to consider. You may want to do that as well. And then we'll need your scraper and spatula. I have 5 piping bags. I'm going to make a white cake, so I'm going to use one bag for that to frost the cake and do the crumb coat underneath it. Elastics to go with that, by the way. But the other 4 are for different colors that I chose from previous classes. I have orange, yellow, blue, and fuchsia. These are just going to be to add some decoration. And I also made vanilla cake, and I decided to use these colors to make each layer match. I just thought that would be fun and happy and exciting. A couple things that we'll need from the store or your home: some white chocolate chips and heavy whipping cream. That's how we're going to make the drip. And also we'll use a few chocolate chips to stick the cake onto the board. And then if you have a small cookie cutter, that's great. I'd say this is like a 2-inch one. If not, I've used the top of a water bottle before. You can hand cut circles, but if you have anything that's a similar size, it will make it a lot easier. And you know what? I think that's everything, and we're good to go. This cake will be 4 layers tall, but just choose 3 for now and we will remove the centers. I used the cookie cutter, but you could also use a water bottle or some other circular object like this. I melted a small amount of white chocolate chips for 20 seconds so that it would be melted but not runny, and then I added the food coloring that matches the layer that would be on the bottom of my cake so that it would blend. Since this cake has a hole in the middle, I found that it's easier to put the chocolate on the cake rather than the board like I did in the previous videos. The cake layer that we're starting with is one of the 3 that has the hole in the middle. The last one that goes on top will be the one that we did not cut the center out of. This piping bag is filled with my traditional American buttercream. The recipe is on my website. If you need help with filling the bag, check out that first video again where I go a little bit more in depth. I piped the borders around the edges and then I filled the gap in the middle. Now we can use the offset spatula to smooth out this layer of frosting. If you need to, just scrape your offset spatula into a bowl. I did not frost the inside of the hole, I just used the spatula to scrape it. Now we can add our second layer, also with a hole in the center. I added the frosting by tracing the outside edge and then the inside edge, filling the gap in the middle after that. Try not to lay your spatula flat like this. Instead, put it at an angle. It's a lot easier to work with. I didn't frost the inside, but I used the spatula to neaten the edges. Now adding the last layer that has a hole. Repeat the steps for frosting this layer. Once you've neatened the edges, grab the sprinkles and dump them in. We can top this off with the final cake layer, the one that does not have a hole in the middle. And there's been times where I accidentally put a hole in all four, so I hope that that did not happen to you. Now grab your piping bag to start the crumb coat. It's okay if cake is showing through and there's little gaps while you're doing this, because we're going to use the spatula and then the scraper. You can see that I didn't cover every little piece of cake, but using the spatula, I do cover all of it. Next, I added some frosting to the top. And I used the spatula at an angle, just like we did earlier, to smooth it out. Once your cake is covered in frosting, grab the scraper and begin to gently turn your turntable, holding the scraper at a strong angle. As you notice any air bubbles or just areas that are missing frosting, you can use your spatula or the piping bag to fill them in. When I'm filling gaps, I really slather the frosting on there because I know that I'm going to use the scraper to smooth it back out again. If too much frosting builds up on your scraper, you can wipe it off into a bowl. To create sharp edges, get down level with the cake and gently push the spatula from the edge into the center, wiping it clean with each pass. You can clean up the cake board using the offset spatula to wipe up the frosting. A paper towel helps too. To make the drip, take a 1/4 cup of heavy whipping cream and place it in the microwave until it just starts to bubble. For my microwave, it took about 45 seconds. Here it is after it's been heated. Now add 1 cup of white chocolate chips. Stir the two together. If it really seems like it's not all melting down, you can pop it in the microwave for 5 seconds at a time. Add whichever food coloring you choose. Now we're ready to fill the bottle, so very carefully pour it in. I also wanted to show you that I snipped the end of the, I guess the cap here to make it a little bit wider so that the drip would be thicker. Now it's time to frost the cake. So take your piping bag and turn the table, working your way up the cake like this. If you're applying the frosting liberally like I do, you don't need to go all the way to the top because there's plenty there once you start spreading with the offset spatula. Once the frosting is all spread out, pick up the scraper. Remember to hold the scraper at an angle, applying very gentle pressure at first and then gradually increasing as you go. You can use the frosting that builds up on the scraper to fill in any air bubbles like this. You can also just pipe frosting right from the piping bag. Continue scraping and filling in the gaps until you have a nice smooth surface. here's something that's pretty tricky. These lines that happen when you put the scraper down or pick it up off of the cake. The trick is to put the scraper a few inches ahead of that line. Start turning the table and then very, very slowly and gently begin to apply pressure with the scraper, turning as you go, moving over that line. And also slowly and gently lifting the scraper while turning. Now onto crisp edges. I'm eye level with the edge of the cake so that I can move the spatula from the outside to the inside, keeping it level and making sure that each pass lines up with the pass before it. Always remove frosting in between each pass. And clean up the board using the spatula and a paper towel. Well, and or whatever works for you. This was so annoying, but it was good to show you that mistakes happen and there's always a way to fix it. I treated this like an air bubble and just slathered some frosting on there and then used the scraper to smooth it back out. So here's the reality with the drip. It's really, really difficult to get the hang of. You want the ganache, well, the drip, to be as close to room temperature as possible because when it's warm, it runs like this. So I always do a tester. I pick one spot and I do a test drip. I check to see how far down it goes. Now, this went down further than I wanted it to, but since the cake is frozen, you can scrape it right off. And take two after I let it cool down some more. It's easy to be tricked. You always want to wait and see where it stops dripping. Sometimes it just drips really slow and it tricks you, but this one stopped right there and I loved that. Here's a top angle to show that I actually apply the drip on the top of the cake and let it fall over the edge. And always start with just a tiny little bit of pressure on the bottle. Don't let too much come out because you need to sort of get the hang of how far down it's going to go. Once you get the hang of it, you can decide, all right, this drip I'm going to use a little bit more, this drip I'm going to use a little bit less, and once you feel completely comfortable, you can just keep on turning the table and do it a little more quickly. Covering the top of cakes and ganache is one of my favorite things. It's really simple, but it looks really cool. So you don't need to be neat and tidy, just pour a bunch onto the top like this. I don't put it near the edges to start because I don't want it to fall over and ruin the drip that I made, but I spread it out like this, and then once it's all covered, I slowly push it just a little more to the edge. But I'm really just getting close to the edge, I'm not letting it fall over. This looks gorgeous and it's a perfect way to end your cake. But if you want to try and get fancier, I'm going to show you a couple more tricks as well. Hold your spatula at an angle and apply very gentle pressure. Honestly, it's almost just the weight of the spatula, and spin in a circle. Once you get to where you started, begin to turn in and spiral away. I overlap just slightly with each spiral. This is also a great way to end, and this is how I finish off a lot of my cakes, but since this is a class video, I'm going to give you a few other options if you want to try and get fancy. Take the 4 colors that you used for making your cake layers and put each into its own piping bag. This is the bottom of the cake. I'm just showing you a close-up. Use your first color and make, a circle. Doesn't need to be pretty at all. I guess it's more of a blob, but use the back of your spatula to drag it down like this. Now take your second color and make another blob right on top of it, kind of towards the end. You want it to overlap, and then do the same thing, drag to the side using the back of the spatula. And overlap your next blob. Spatula drag. Repeat. Here's a really important tip. Make sure you're wiping the spatula clean every single time. So I had no intention of doing this on the top of my cake, but I found this technique to be very therapeutic and I really just enjoyed it, so I kept on doing it. I started by making a bunch of blobs around the edges. And then I dragged them down. Drag, wipe, drag, wipe, drag, wipe, drag, wipe, drag. You get it. And since I ended up making a mess, I decided to go ahead and add another row. Add your next set of blobs and overlap them slightly with that row before it. At this point, I was really just winging it, and I realized that I never used the blue up here. I didn't want to at first since the drip was blue, but now that we were in the center, I thought that it would be a nice pop, so that's what I did. And at this point, I was like, hey, this looks like a cool flower, so there we go, I put some yellow in the center. And now for the fun part. This is what the inside of a sprinkle explosion cake looks like, and these are actually really cool for gender reveal parties to put blue or pink inside. Just a thought.